It was an ordinary morning. The bakeries were open, the markets were busy, children were playing in the streets, fishermen were selling their catch at the harbor. A gladiator was preparing for a fight scheduled for later that afternoon. 79 AD, Pompeii, Italy, August 24th. Nobody knew it would be their last morning. Not because they were careless, not because they were stupid, but because what was about to happen had never happened before in recorded human history. Nobody had a word for it. Nobody had a warning system for it. Nobody even understood what a volcano was. They called it a mountain, Mount Vesuvius. It had been there their entire lives, their parents' entire lives, their grandparents' entire lives. It was covered in vineyards that produced some of the finest wine in the Roman Empire. Its slopes were dotted with farms and villas. Its peak was occasionally hidden by clouds. And on the morning of August 24th, 79 AD, the clouds above the mountain began to look different. Nobody paid attention. By midnight, 20,000 people were dead. An entire civilization frozen in the last moment of its existence, buried under 60 feet of volcanic ash and rock. And for 1,700 years, nobody knew they were there. This is the story of the day Vesuvius buried an entire world alive. 79 AD, the Bay of Naples, Italy, the most beautiful place in the Roman world. To understand what was lost on August 24th, you first need to understand what existed before. The Bay of Naples in 79 AD was the most desirable piece of real estate in the entire Roman Empire. The wealthy came here to escape the noise and heat of Rome. Senators built villas on the hillsides. Emperors kept summer palaces on the coastline. The water was blue and clear and warm. The volcanic soil, enriched over centuries by Vesuvius itself, produced extraordinarily fertile farmland. Pompeii was one of several prosperous towns clustered around the bay. It was not a small village. It was a thriving Roman city of approximately 20,000 people. It had a forum. It had 2 theaters. It had a large amphitheater capable of holding the entire population of the city for gladiatorial games. It had bakeries, restaurants, taverns, brothels, law courts, and public baths. It had everything a Roman city needed, including, as archaeologists have since discovered, an extraordinarily detailed record of everyday Roman life. The graffiti on the walls of Pompeii has survived 2,000 years. Love poems, political slogans, insults, jokes, shopping lists. Successus, the weaver, loves Iris, the innkeeper's slave girl. I am amazed, O wall, that you have not fallen in ruins, you who support the tediousness of so many writers. These are the voices of real people, people who walked those streets on the morning of August 24th, people who had no idea what was coming. Just north of Pompeii sat the slightly larger city of Herculaneum, smaller than Pompeii but wealthier, a resort town where Rome's elite came to relax. Its villas were magnificent, its streets were immaculate. And between them all, rising gently from the landscape, the mountain, Vesuvius. The Romans knew it was special. The soil around it was uniquely fertile. The wines it produced were famous across the empire. Some Roman writers had noted that the peak of Vesuvius resembled the peaks of mountains in Greece and Sicily that were known to occasionally produce fire. But those mountains were far away, and Vesuvius had been silent for so long. 800 years of silence. 800 years of vineyards and farms and villas and children playing on its slopes. 800 years of ordinary mornings. Until August 24th.
62 AD to 79 AD. The Bay of Naples. 17 years of signs. Here is something that makes the story of Vesuvius even more devastating. It warned them. Not once, not twice, for 17 years before the eruption, Vesuvius sent signals that something was deeply wrong beneath the earth. Signals that, if anyone had understood what they meant, might have saved thousands of lives. In 62 AD, 17 years before the eruption, a massive earthquake struck the Bay of Naples. It was so powerful that it severely damaged Pompeii. Buildings collapsed, the water system was disrupted, statues toppled. The Romans rebuilt. They repaired the damage. They assumed it was just an earthquake. They had no way of knowing it was Vesuvius waking up. In the years that followed, the earthquakes continued, small ones at first, then larger. In the days immediately before the eruption, the tremors became almost constant, so frequent that the residents of Pompeii had stopped noticing them. The springs and wells around Vesuvius began behaving strangely. Water that had flowed reliably for generations suddenly dried up. Other springs changed their taste. Animals in the area became agitated and refused to eat. The ground itself was changing. Beneath Vesuvius, a massive chamber of magma, heated to over 1,000 degrees, was slowly filling with new material. The pressure was building. The earth above it was cracking. The water table was being disrupted by the heat. Every one of these signs was a message, but the message was written in a language nobody alive could read. Because nobody in the Roman world had ever seen a volcanic eruption. The last time Vesuvius had erupted was approximately 1800 BC, long before Rome existed, long before anyone who might have passed down the story was alive. They had no word for what was coming. They had no concept of it. August 24th, 79 AD, approximately 1 p.m. The mountain opens. It began just after midday, with a sound that survivors later described as louder than anything they had ever heard. A crack, an explosion, something fundamental breaking in the earth itself. And then the mountain opened. What came out was not simply fire. What came out was the accumulated pressure of decades of geological fury released in a single catastrophic moment. A column of superheated gas, ash, and rock exploded upward from the summit of Vesuvius at extraordinary speed. Within minutes, it had reached a height of 20 to 30 kilometers into the sky, higher than the clouds, higher than anything the Romans had ever seen, man-made or natural, reach toward the heavens. The young Pliny, later known as Pliny the Younger, was staying with his uncle at Misenum, approximately 30 kilometers from Vesuvius, on the other side of the Bay of Naples. He was 17 years old. He watched the eruption begin from across the water. He later wrote about it in letters that have survived to this day. He described the column rising from the mountain as resembling a pine tree, narrow at the base, spreading at the top. He described the sky darkening. He described the sea retreating from the shore in a strange withdrawal. He described the ash beginning to fall like snow across the bay. He described his uncle, Pliny the Elder, commander of the Roman fleet, ordering his ships to sail toward the disaster, not to flee it, toward it. Because Pliny the Elder was a man of extraordinary curiosity. He wanted to observe, he wanted to understand, he wanted to help the people on the shore who were sending signals by waving cloths and fire. He sailed directly toward the erupting volcano. He would not come back. Meanwhile, in Pompeii, just 9 kilometers from the summit of Vesuvius, the sky had turned dark in the middle of the afternoon. Ash was falling. The air smelled of sulfur. The ground was shaking. People began to leave. But not everyone. Some stayed because they thought it would pass. Some stayed to guard their property. Some stayed because they were too old or too sick to move quickly. Some stayed because they simply did not understand the scale of what was happening. They would all regret it.
August 24th, 79 AD, 1 p.m. to 6 p.m., Pompeii. In the first hours after the eruption began, Pompeii was not immediately destroyed. This is one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the entire story. The people of Pompeii had hours, several hours, in which they could have escaped, and many did. The roads leading away from the city were crowded with people fleeing, carrying what they could, pulling animals, helping the elderly and the sick. The ash was falling heavily now. Pumice stones, light porous rocks ejected from the volcano, were raining down on the city. They were not immediately lethal. They were uncomfortable. They were frightening, but they were survivable. Some people sheltered in their homes. They thought, reasonably, that if they waited out the worst of it inside a solid structure, they would be safe. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. Archaeologists have found extraordinary evidence of what people did in those hours. In one house, a family had gathered their most valuable possessions, jewelry, coins, silver items, and were apparently preparing to leave. They never made it out. In another house, a dog had been chained to a post by its owner, presumably someone who planned to return. The pumice built up so quickly that the dog was eventually lifted off the ground by the rising debris, its chains still attached to the post below, until it too was buried. In the Forum, a group of people had taken shelter inside a building. They waited and waited and waited. The pumice kept falling. The sky stayed dark. The ground kept shaking. And somewhere above them, in the volcanic column towering over the city, something was changing. The eruption was entering a new and far more deadly phase. August 24th, 79 AD. August 25th, 79 AD. Midnight to dawn. The end. Around midnight, the volcanic column that had been rising high into the sky began to collapse. This is the moment everything changed. When a volcanic column collapses, the superheated material that had been held aloft by the force of the eruption comes crashing back down. It flows outward from the base of the volcano at extraordinary speed, a pyroclastic surge, a wave of superheated gas and ash and rock, moving at up to 300 kilometers per hour at temperatures of 300 degrees Celsius or more. Nothing in its path survives. The first surges reached Herculaneum, closer to Vesuvius than Pompeii, in the early hours of the morning. Herculaneum had been largely evacuated. Most of its residents had fled hours earlier, but not all of them. Archaeologists excavating the ancient boat chambers at Herculaneum in the 1980s made one of the most disturbing discoveries in the history of archaeology. Hundreds of people had taken shelter in the boat storage areas at the waterfront, apparently waiting for rescue ships that never came. The pyroclastic surge hit them at around 1 a.m. The temperature was so extreme and the speed so sudden that their death was instantaneous. Their bones have been found in perfect positions, people sitting, crouching, huddled together, a mother holding her child, a soldier still wearing his armor. The heat was so intense that it vaporized soft tissue and boiled the fluid in their skulls, causing some of their skulls to explode. They felt nothing. It was over in a second. Then the surges reached Pompeii. The first surge reached the northern walls of the city at around 6:30 a.m. on August 25th. It entered the city and killed everyone still inside. Not slowly, not painfully, instantly. The superheated gas entered the lungs and the body was gone before the brain could register what was happening. The famous casts of Pompeii, the human-shaped voids in the volcanic rock that archaeologists later filled with plaster, are not people buried alive in ash. They are the shapes left by bodies that were vaporized by the surges. The ash and pumice hardened around the spaces where the bodies had been, and when the bodies decomposed over centuries, they left hollow spaces in the rock, perfect impressions of their final moments. A man covering his face, a woman clutching her children, a gladiator in his cell, a dog curled in agony, frozen forever. August 24th, 25th, 79 AD. The shore near Stabiae, a death in pursuit of knowledge. While Pompeii was dying, Pliny the Elder had reached the shore. He had sailed across the bay toward the eruption, toward the disaster that everyone else was fleeing, and had landed at the villa of his friend Pompeianus at Stabiae, south of Pompeii. Pompeianus had packed his belongings and was ready to flee. The wind was against him. He couldn't get his boat out of the harbor. Pliny arrived, embraced his friend, bathed, ate dinner, and went to sleep. He actually went to sleep, while Vesuvius erupted in the distance. Ancient sources describe his companions being unable to sleep, watching the fires on the mountain through the night. They describe pumice stones falling in the courtyard of the villa, building up so quickly that if they had stayed inside much longer, the doors would have been blocked. Eventually, they woke Pliny and decided to leave. They tied pillows to their heads with cloth to protect themselves from the falling pumice. They walked toward the shore in complete darkness, darkness at midday because the ash cloud had blotted out the sun. On the shore, Pliny lay down. He stood up. He lay down again. He was a large man. He suffered from a respiratory condition. The sulfurous fumes from the eruption were overwhelming. He died on the shore. The greatest naturalist of the Roman world, the man who had written 37 volumes of natural history, who had sailed toward a volcanic eruption out of pure scientific curiosity, died on the beach at Stabiae, surrounded by darkness and falling ash. He was 56 years old. His nephew, the young Pliny who had watched the eruption from across the bay, survived, and in 2 extraordinary letters written years later to the historian Tacitus, he gave us the most detailed eyewitness account of the eruption that we have. Without those letters, we would know almost nothing about what happened on August 24th and 25th, 79 AD. August 25th, 79 AD. Onward. The Bay of Naples, a world transformed. When the eruption finally ended, the Bay of Naples was unrecognizable. Pompeii was buried under 4 to 6 meters of ash and pumice. Herculaneum was buried under 20 meters of volcanic material, so deep that it would not be properly excavated until the 20th century. The coastline had physically changed. New land had been created by the volcanic debris extending into the sea. The rivers had changed course. The harbor at Herculaneum no longer existed, and the cities were simply gone. The Emperor Titus, who had just come to power weeks before the eruption, sent 2 former consuls to organize relief efforts. He visited the region personally. He donated enormous sums from the imperial treasury to help survivors, but there was nothing to save. The survivors, those who had fled in time, returned to find their cities vanished under meters of debris. Some attempted to dig down to recover possessions. Ancient tunnels have been found beneath Pompeii, people who tried to excavate their own homes in the days after the eruption. Most gave up. Eventually, the entire region was simply abandoned. The cities that had been among the most prosperous in the Roman Empire became nothing but a flat plain of gray ash. And then the ash was plowed over, and then the ash was built on, and then new towns grew on top of the buried cities. And within a few generations, almost nobody remembered that Pompeii and Herculaneum had ever existed. 1748 AD. Pompeii. A world returns from the dead. In 1748, 1669 years after the eruption, workers digging in the fields near the town of Civita in southern Italy struck something solid beneath the surface. Stone, marble, And then something extraordinary. Paintings. Still vivid after 17 centuries. The excavation that followed, continuing in various forms to this day, revealed something that no archaeological site in the world has ever quite replicated. A city frozen in time. Not ruins, not the weathered remnants of a civilization, but a city caught in a single moment, the moment the ash fell, and preserved with extraordinary completeness. The bread still in the bakery ovens, the gladiator's armor still on the rack, the election graffiti still on the walls, political campaigns for officials whose names we now know, the carbonized remains of food still on the tables, and the people. The hollow spaces in the ash where human beings had been. In 1863, the archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli had a remarkable idea. Instead of simply excavating around the voids and moving on, he injected liquid plaster into them. And out came the people of Pompeii, frozen in their final moments. A man with his hands covering his face, a family huddled together, a pregnant woman, a child reaching for a parent who was already gone. They had been waiting in the darkness for 1,700 years, and now they were visible again, and they still had faces. What the ash preserved. Here is what makes Pompeii different from every other site in the world. Most of what we know about ancient Rome comes from what the Romans chose to record: official histories, imperial biographies, the letters of senators and philosophers. The lives of ordinary people, the baker, the tavern keeper, the slave, the schoolboy, the street vendor, almost entirely disappeared, except in Pompeii. In Pompeii, the ordinary survived alongside the extraordinary, because the ash preserved everything equally: the senator's villa and the slave's quarters, the grand temple and the small shrine on the street corner, the official inscription and the graffiti scratched by a bored child. Marcus loves Spendusa. The one who buggles, is Secundus. Gaius Plumidius Dipulus was here on October 3rd, 78 BC. Real voices, real people, real lives. And among all the things the ash preserved, the most extraordinary discovery was made not in Pompeii, but in Herculaneum. The Villa of the Papyri, a private library containing approximately 1,800 ancient scrolls, many of them works of Greek philosophy that no longer exist anywhere else in the world. The scrolls were carbonized by the heat of the eruption, turned to fragile black tubes of carbon that crumbled at the touch. For centuries, scholars could not read them, but in recent years, using X-ray technology and artificial intelligence, those scrolls are finally being read. Ancient words, written 2,000 years ago, buried for 17 centuries, emerging from the darkness, letter by letter. The eruption that destroyed a world also preserved it.
On the morning of August 24th, 79 AD, 20,000 people woke up in the most beautiful part of the Roman Empire and went about their ordinary lives. They bought bread. They argued about politics. They fell in love. They made plans for tomorrow. And then the mountain opened. And by the following morning, their world was gone. But here's the thing about Vesuvius. In destroying Pompeii and Herculaneum, it also preserved them. The ash that killed thousands of people also froze their world at the moment of its ending, preserving it with a completeness that no other ancient site can match. Because of Vesuvius, we know more about the daily life of an ordinary Roman citizen than we know about almost any other civilization from the ancient world. The baker's bread, the gladiator's armor, the child's graffiti, the mother's final embrace. They were buried alive, but they were never truly lost. And if this video made you think about the people behind the history, leave a like. It helps more than you know. Subscribe, because next time we go even deeper. See you in the next one.